So I was doom scrolling through Netflix the other night, as I so often do, and I came across Crazy Stupid Love, which is a movie that I haven't seen since I was an exchange student in Germany in 2013. And I remember this because I was hanging out with this girl I had a huge crush on, and she suggested we watch it because it was her favorite movie. Being the pretentious little film snob that I was when I was 17, I decided that I didn't like it because the romantic comedy subgenre as a whole was beneath me, or whatever. After all, name a romantic comedy that's as good as Fight Club or Pulp Fiction. I'll wait. Remembering how mercilessly I lampooned it just to prove to the object of my affections that I had more cultivated filmic sensibilities than she, I felt Crazy Stupid Love deserved a fair shake in the year of our Lord 2022, so I cracked open a beer and I gave it a watch. And I wish with my whole heart that I could say this movie is a home run, but it missed the fence by about 3 feet and I need to talk about it. Part 1. Missing the mark of excellence is more frustrating than mediocrity. I feel the immediate need to clarify that I don't think this is a bad movie, because it's not. What I'm instead saying is that this movie was right on the precipice of greatness and it just missed the mark. And I might be all alone on this, but honestly, I find that more frustrating than a movie just straight up being mediocre or bad. Subpar movies have this magical way of lowering your expectations right off the bat, which makes them a lot easier to enjoy. I watched Barnyard recently and it was awful. Truly one of the worst movies I've ever seen, but I was laughing like a moron the entire time because I knew in the first 5 minutes that this movie was not trying to impress me.
What's up?
Death on the Nile was another one I watched recently, and it was the definition of mediocre, but it still worked. It was formulaic and the performances weren't very good, but it didn't frustrate me as much as Crazy Stupid Love. And I'm aware that this might seem counterintuitive, just bear with me. I'm going to get into the reasons why I feel this way, but I want to start with what I like about this movie. Part 2. The cast. The cast is excellent from top to bottom, and I don't think there's a single person out of place. The film is anchored by what have retrospectively, in my opinion, become career-defining performances from both Steve Carell and Ryan Gosling.
You're like badgering people with this sad sack, loser, sob story, and I don't understand why.
No, I don't need this crap.
Now, sit down.
All right.
Whether or not The Big Short is the greatest movie of the 21st century is a debate that film historians can settle, but I think it puts together a pretty good case.
Here's world-famous chef Anthony Bourdain to explain.
Gosling and Carell have such great chemistry in Crazy Stupid Love that I can say with almost 100% certainty that it acted as an informal screen test for The Big Short.
Person who has found this thing. Hold on. So mortgage bonds are dog shit. CDOs are dog shit wrapped in cat shit.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
These two make this movie. They play really well off each other, and I smiled every single time they had a scene together. And I feel like to a certain extent, Crazy Stupid Love leveraged their own reputations and past performances to make them a more effective duo. Like, think about what these two were best known for going into this movie. Steve Carell had spent the previous 7 years playing Michael Scott in The Office, who's a clueless buffoon with no social graces whatsoever.
I need a username, and I have a great one. Little Kid Lover. That way people will know exactly where my priorities are at.
And Ryan Gosling at this point was best known for The Notebook and that tiny part he had in Remember the Titans before he was hot.
Huh?
So watching Ryan Gosling flex his comedy chops while Steve Carell plays it relatively straight was really interesting and unexpected. Don't get me wrong, Steve Carell definitely has funny, cringy moments while Ryan Gosling has moments where his only job is to stand there and be sexy, but for the most part we're seeing sides of these actors that we're not as used to seeing. In addition to Carell and Gosling, I enjoyed almost all of the smaller characters, particularly because I just think I'd forgotten how many awesome people were in this movie. I mean, Julianne Moore, Kevin Bacon, Marissa Tomei, John Carroll Lynch, like this cast was stacked. I audibly squealed when I was reminded that Josh freaking Groban was in this movie.
And I hope you can make it because it's going to be a special night.
The funniest part is that I did the exact same thing when I saw it the first time. I've been a big fan of his music since I was a kid, so when he showed up on screen, I just remember being like, I'm sorry, is that Josh Groban?
Oh my goodness, it's Josh Groban! Hi, are you Josh Groban? Yeah.
So it makes me happy to see him acting because he's actually pretty good and we don't deserve him. You know who we do deserve though? Emma Stone, because we have sinned against a jealous and angry God who knows that I will not be at peace as long as Emma Stone keeps making movies.
And you're a jealous virgin.
Which reminds me that in the same way this movie would make a great double feature with The Big Short, it would make a terrible double feature with La La Land, because La La Land sucks and Damien Chazelle doesn't know anything about music.
Is
say there's nothing here. Well, let's make something clear. I think I'll be the one to make that call.
There you go. Those are my hot takes for the day. I dislike both Emma Stone and Damien Chazelle, despite the fact that they've both won Oscars. In all seriousness, though, this is probably one of my favorite Emma Stone performances. She doesn't have a ton of screen time, but I feel like she excels as a member of an ensemble cast. And this was at a point in her career where she wasn't quite everywhere yet, so she wasn't taking herself too seriously. I think the only performance of hers I like more than this is her little cameo in Friends with Benefits, in which I'm pretty sure the only direction she was given was to just act natural for 2.5 minutes. Regardless, she does a pretty good job, and she had great chemistry with Ryan Gosling. I swear, the more I write about this movie, the more I realize that Ryan Gosling just murders, and everybody else is just an accessory to murder. Before I move on, I have to at least mention the kids and the babysitter, and I think they actually did a pretty good job. Young actors are generally subpar, so I give them a pass if they don't spend all of their screen time embarrassing themselves.
Are you an angel?
What?
An angel.
And I was super thrown off by the fact that Joey King was in this movie. Like, I guess I didn't know that she acted when she was that young, so I was looking right at her, and I was like, hey, look, it's the girl from Ramona and Beezus. And the ensuing Google search proceeded to splatter my brains across the wall.
What? No.
Overall, she was a pretty harmless presence, but the son and the babysitter were another matter entirely.
I'm sorry you had to see that.
Yeah, I should have knocked.
But I don't think it's entirely fair to say that their performances were the issue here. The actors themselves are fine, it's just the subject matter that makes me want to jump off a cliff.
I think about you while I do it.
Robbie.
More on that later. Part 3, Preventing Information Overload and Making Connections. Outside of a stellar cast, another of Crazy Stupid Love's strong points is how efficiently it uses information. First, you have Steve Carell and his wife getting a divorce, his son having a crush on the babysitter, who in turn has a crush on Steve Carell. You have Julianne Moore's relationship with Kevin Bacon, Steve Carell and Ryan Gosling's friendship, as well as Ryan Gosling's eventual relationship with Emma Stone after she dumps Josh Groban.
I'm Josh Groban!
But all of these storylines are clear and concise. The movie doesn't waste any character's screen time. If someone is on screen, we're learning about them and figuring out how they factor into the wider narrative. And this feat is not easy to accomplish. There are plenty of movies that give the viewer a comparable amount of information to process, but bad writing or bad filmmaking keeps it from landing. Love Actually is a great example of this. It bombards you with information, but it never connects in a meaningful way. The plot lines are all related in some way, shape, or form, but the film plays like a series of disjointed vignettes as opposed to a cohesive narrative. I mean, if your character chart looks like this, you probably need to reevaluate.
I'm lost!
In the world of long-form improvisation, there's a format called the Herald, the finer details of which are a little complicated to get into here, but the overarching goal is to establish a series of ostensibly disparate comedic scenarios and then find ways to make connections and weave them together as the Herald progresses. Performers will spend upwards of an hour establishing bits and in-jokes while they refine and build upon them until finally they connect all of it together in 30 glorious seconds of improvisational genius. Making connections like these is incredibly challenging. The performers as well as the audience really have to listen and pay attention to every single thing that happens on stage. The climaxes of Heralds can leave an audience in tears, not only because what they've just seen is really funny, but because they've been trusted to follow along and put the pieces together themselves. The climax of Crazy Stupid Love might be one of the funniest scenes ever put to film, and it uses the exact same principles as a Herald to achieve that result. Steve Carell has been trying to get over his ex, who at the same time has been sort of half-heartedly pursuing her relationship with Kevin Bacon. We've also seen Steve Carell's son become more and more obsessed with the babysitter, who in turn has become more and more obsessed with Steve Carell. So much so that she has photographed herself naked so that she can give the pictures to Steve Carell to make herself seem more mature. We've also been watching Steve Carell transform into a total ladies' man through his friendship with Ryan Gosling, who, at the same time, has abandoned his womanizing ways in favor of dating Emma Stone. And when all of these storylines collide, it is absolutely bonkers. So Steve Carell is going home to surprise Julianne Moore with miniature golf, which happens to be the exact same time that Ryan Gosling is going over to meet Emma Stone's mom, who is Julianne Moore. When Ryan Gosling walks into the backyard where Steve Carell is already standing, chaos ensues.
I'm having trouble understanding what's going on right now.
The immediate issue is that Ryan Gosling has been slowly turning Steve Carell into a douchebag over the last few months, so Steve Carell obviously doesn't want him dating his daughter.
You guys are together?
Yeah, yes.
No way. Break up right now.
Daddy?
Please don't call him that. Cal, that's not gonna happen.
Then I will mess you up!
But before he can really do anything, he's absolutely decked by John Carroll Lynch, who thinks that Steve Carell is pulling an American Beauty with his daughter. Can you imagine, by the way, how wild of a double feature Crazy Stupid Love and American Beauty would be? Like, they tug at all the same threads, but they do it in totally different ways. Anyway. So all of this nonsense is going on, and Kevin Bacon just kind of bad luck Brian's his way into the fray.
Who are you?
I'm David Lindhagen. David Lindhagen.
David Lindhagen.
Okay. Is this a bad time?
Like, he doesn't even do anything. He's just returning Julianne Moore's sweater when he gets his absolute shit rocked by Ryan Gosling because he's the guy responsible for making Steve Carell miserable in the first place. I don't know. The whole scene is nothing short of brilliant, and it's brilliant in a number of ways. As an audience member, we're expecting a lot of these things to come to a head. We're expecting John Carroll Lynch to find out about his daughter's crush on Steve Carell. We're expecting the son to be brokenhearted that the babysitter has a crush on his dad, and we're expecting Steve Carell to finally encounter Kevin Bacon. But what we're not expecting is for Emma Stone to be Steve Carell's daughter. This is the single piece of information that the audience didn't even know they were missing. It makes everything make sense while simultaneously igniting all of the conflict. We didn't even know that Steve Carell had an older daughter. We've only heard her referred to as Nana up to this point, so it's totally reasonable for us to assume she's just the kid's grandmother. So when Emma Stone turns out to be Nana, the glass shatters for both Ryan Gosling and the audience. And this just goes to show that you don't need the biggest, craziest twist to make a climax compelling. This is just good old-fashioned writing, and we love to see it. Part 4. Why couldn't the movie just end there?
You don't want to know. You want to know why? Tell me why.
The climax of this movie is so brilliant that I am 100% convinced that it was supposed to be the end of the movie and the studio wouldn't allow it. Writers and directors always have a vision, but the studio usually has the final say on what makes the cut, so that original vision is almost never what we end up seeing. This studio interference is rarely confirmed, but it's something that I love to speculate about, and the ending of this movie has me speculating to the moon and back. Let's try a little thought experiment, shall we? We've just watched 4 grown men make complete fools out of themselves, and now they're sitting neatly in a row while a couple of suburban-ass cops talk to them like 5th graders.
Simmer down, okay? We all have arguments, but if you're gonna fight, just do it inside. Keep it in the family, okay?
And from here, everyone just starts to disperse. There's this air of melancholy, but it's balanced out by a newfound understanding. Now, this is where the thought experiment starts. What kind of feelings would this movie leave you with if Steve Carell's son said,
"Go home, Dad,"
and Steve Carell just meanders down the driveway with his head down as the credits start to roll? As I was sitting there watching the scene play out, I said to myself, could you imagine if this movie had the balls to just end right here? Before I continue, I want to issue a spoiler warning for the 2019 film Ford v Ferrari. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. I'll be here when you get back. I stumbled across Ford v Ferrari at what feels like the perfect time because it does exactly what Crazy Stupid Love doesn't. Christian Bale plays a scrappy race car driver named Ken Miles, who was well on his way to winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans when the Ford execs asked him to slow down and finish just in front of the other Ford cars so they could photograph it. Matt Damon, who plays Ken Miles' manager, Carroll Shelby, doesn't want to give him the order, but he knows there's no way Ken Miles would follow it. Well, wouldn't you know it, Ken Miles does follow it, and he loses first place on a technicality.
You promised me the drive. Not the win.
Now, given that Ford v Ferrari is based on a true story and Google exists, the filmmakers were already saddled with an atypical Hollywood ending, but they still had every right to end the movie right here. Our hero was robbed of the win, but he's grown a lot since the start of the film. He'll get over it. He and Shelby could have walked down the track and the credits could have rolled, but they didn't. Ken Miles really was robbed of a spectacular win at Le Mans, but he was also killed in a vehicle testing accident less than 3 months later. The movie doesn't show the crash itself, but we see the reaction of Miles' son and the rest of the racing team as they run toward the smoke. And this scene is followed up by an absolutely gut-wrenching scene in which Carroll Shelby goes to talk to Miles' son to end the movie.
Your daddy was,
He was your friend.
Yes, he was. Yes, sir.
Again, the filmmakers didn't have to do this. They could have given us the sad reality in an epilogue or something, but they had the guts to tell you that this character fought for something his entire life, he was robbed of it, and he died before he could do anything about it. And the movie is so much better for it. Moneyball is another great film that tells a story with an unsatisfying ending. You're following an underdog team implementing an untested strategy that conventional wisdom spits on, and it's actually working. The team makes history, but they don't win the big game. Billy Beane and the Oakland A's are chasing a ring to this day. These endings aren't satisfying, but they're human. They give us a sense of catharsis because we've all experienced disappointment and letdown. Instead of seeing the people we aspire to be in their successes, we see the people we are in their failures. But Crazy Stupid Love is a romantic comedy, and that's not how romantic comedies end. You can't ask the guy who does your taxes to change your oil, it's not his job. Crazy Stupid Love has earned the right to give the audience the ending they want instead of the ending that's the most profound. I will never know for sure if the creators wanted to end the movie right after that fight scene, and seeing as how this is the same directing duo that brought us Cats and Dogs, it might be giving them too much credit. But in my cinematic universe, the directors wanted to end the movie right there, and the studio said no because they were scared that the audience wouldn't get it. But the side effect of dropping a scene as great as this at the 90-minute mark of a 2-hour movie is that whatever comes next is going to be a letdown. Part 5. The ending sucks.
Yeah, well, that's just like, your opinion, man.
But wait a minute, you might be saying. The end of this movie is kind of cute. Maybe a little formulaic, but it wraps everything up nicely. And yeah, sure, but it's also boring and predictable. You know that Steve Carell is going to warm up to Ryan Gosling dating his daughter, and you also know he's going to do some grand romantic gesture at the end to get Julianne Moore back. And it's reasonable to assume that the babysitter is at least going to throw the kid a bone by giving him a kiss on the cheek or something, which is totally unearned, by the way, because the kid is a psychopath and she spent the entire movie completely mortified by his advances. And since the movie knows that you know that all these things are going to happen, it has to happen in the cringiest way possible. And that's what's so disappointing. This movie has spent 90 straight minutes subverting your expectations and using clever filmmaking and writing to tell an interesting and offbeat story, only to give up in the last 20 minutes and have Steve Carell commandeer his son's 8th grade salutatorian speech. What? Who wrote this?
My son's graduation speech sucks.
Firstly, I don't even think middle schools have salutatorians. I'm pretty sure they just give everyone participation trophies and call it a day because middle school is a joke and everyone knows it. Secondly, Steve Carell's son is not the salutatorian of his 8th grade class. There's no way.
And this book is just about a bunch of assholes who fell in love like assholes, then had to die like assholes.
That boy did not get an A in that class. Not to mention the fact that Steve Carell slept with his teacher and never called her back. Marissa Tomei's character is petty as shit, and I can absolutely guarantee she would flunk that kid after finding out that he's Steve Carell's son.
Tell her she's the perfect combination of sexy and cute, asshole.
8th grade salutatorian doesn't even seem true to the kid's character. His academic acumen is never mentioned prior to this moment, and his character development pretty much begins and ends with his crush on the babysitter, so I don't even find it believable that he does his homework. As ludicrous as it is that this boy is the 8th grade salutatorian in the first place, it's even more ludicrous that Steve Carell interrupts this depressing-ass speech to talk about how his wife is his
soulmate. Soulmate.
I'm your soulmate.
The whole moment just feels so contrived. There's a world in which this is kind of cute, but I just can't fathom why Steve Carell and Julianne Moore couldn't have a human conversation and reconcile their differences like normal people, especially because we've already seen them do it. Their little moment outside the English teacher's room right before the parent-teacher conference is electric.
But I'm mad at myself too. Because I should not have jumped out of that car. I should have fought for you. Because you fight for your soulmates. At least that's what my 13-year-old son tells me.
Their chemistry and sexual tension is super believable, and it's fun to watch. Why couldn't we just get a reprise of that moment? I understand that this is a romantic comedy and there needs to be a grand romantic gesture so everyone can live happily ever after.
I met my soulmate when I was 15 years old.
This just feels like the worst grand romantic gesture they could have possibly picked.
You are wrong.
The absurdity of this moment aside, it's not even the cringiest thing that happens before the movie ends. The uncomfortable speech is over, everyone's walking around outside, and hey look, there's Steve Carell going over to give Ryan Gosling his blessing so everything can be right with the world and this movie can be over. Right? Wait, why are we following the kid? The movie's over. Oh no.
I'm really glad you came.
Oh God.
You were a really good babysitter, Jessica.
I don't think I can take any more of this.
Sorry if I made you uncomfortable.
Oh, wait a minute. What's this?
I thought you weren't giving up.
I'm not. And I just figure you like my dad. And in a few years, I'll look like him. I'll come for you then.
We've regressed, but I'm not mad.
Just a little graduation gift to get you through high school.
What?
What?
Take care, Robbie.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
We were literally 90 seconds from the credits rolling. We were this close to getting out of this movie without having a truly early 2010s moment. But here we are.
She's a stupid bitch.
And I feel so torn about how this movie handles the son's crush on the babysitter. Like, on one hand, horny teenagers are gross, and I don't think this movie would have suffered by relegating the son's role to the same level of importance as Joey King's. But on the other hand, the son is actually a good character, and there isn't a single man on earth who doesn't relate to that boy's struggles. I've had so many embarrassing crushes on girls that were a few years older than me, but that's part of growing up. And while watching him do what he does makes me cringe on a deep and personal level, that unwavering spirit is what drives this movie. And I like that he seems to kind of wise up and apologize for making the babysitter uncomfortable. I just wish with every fiber of my being that she had just ruffled his hair and walked away, because in real life that's the absolute best case scenario for a middle school boy crushing on a girl in high school. But instead, this 17-year-old girl gives a 13-year-old boy her nudes, and this is why we can't have nice things. There's this pretty harmful double standard that when an older girl throws a younger boy a romantic bone, it's cute and endearing, but when an older boy does it to a younger girl, it's harmful and predatory. In reality, both of these behaviors are predatory. Obviously, this kind of thing affects young women on a much larger scale than it affects young men, but playing a moment like this for comedy could still have some pretty harmful repercussions. We live in a world where male vulnerability is still kind of quietly demonized in favor of being tough and manly and just gritting your teeth through your problems, and I know that society has progressed, but we still aren't there yet. So when you play a moment like this for a laugh, you're minimizing the struggles of young men who are actually victimized in this way. But I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here. There's a lot to be said on this topic, and I'm not qualified to say it. After all, this is a video essay about crazy, stupid love, and we gotta get back on track. Part 6, Lucy and the Football. As hard as I've been on the ending, this is still a pretty good movie. It's far from perfect, but the fact that I've spent as much time as I have thinking about it and pondering how it makes me feel should prove that I actually enjoyed it. A movie's job, after all, is to provoke thought and make you feel something. And despite having its cringy and problematic moments, it's actually aged a lot better than some of its 2010 era counterparts.
Listen, I've had about 5 cold ones.
Of course you have.
So I'm just gonna go ahead and ask. Did y'all know there's a colored boy in your Christmas cart?
Can't believe that movie was nominated for Best Picture. It drives me fucking crazy. And I also think it bears mentioning that aside being relatively unproblematic, Crazy Stupid Love actually looks really good. It was shot on film, so it's got this warm, nostalgic color palette that really shines in a few scenes.
What a cliche.
It's not an aesthetic marvel or anything, but there's a lot of subtle, purpose-oriented cinematography and some really good editing. It may not always catch your eye, but it enhances the storytelling and ensures that the audience's attention is where it should be. And the film's technical quality is yet another example of it having all the makings of a classic, but not quite being able to put it all together. I talked at the beginning of the video about how mediocrity is oftentimes an easier pill to swallow than wasted potential because of the way it manages your expectations.
Dude, I got an arm!
You're righteous!
So when a movie like Crazy Stupid Love turns out to have a cliche and contrived ending, it feels like Lucy yanking the football away from Charlie Brown. Sticking with our little football analogy here, movies like Barnyard aren't even trying to get the football off the ground. In fact, Lucy isn't even holding it. She and Charlie Brown are off getting ice cream somewhere, and football is the furthest thing from their minds. And that's okay. Barnyard doesn't need to be good. The creators knew they were making a piece of shit targeted towards kids, so they had as much fun with it as they could. But Crazy Stupid Love is a good movie, a genuinely good movie that could have been great. But it's not. And I'm powerless to do anything but sit here and bitch about it. Thanks for watching. feel the need to mention this isn't a real script. I don't use a script. I use a teleprompter. It's right over there. This is a guitar instructional book.